Welcome. Thank you. It's great to be here. Our first time in Vilnius, Jhonny and I. We're coming here from Stockholm, Sweden. We're here to introduce you to the Defold game engine, and we're doing an introduction to the Defold game engine.
There's lots of places to sit in the front, so don't be shy. We don't really bite hard.
Yeah. Do you want to start? Or?
Sure. Yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Jhonny. I'm one of the kind of game engineers of Defold. I started 2018 at King, but I've been working in both the games industry as and as an engine programmer for at least 10 to 12 years or so. I can't even remember. That's how old I am. I've been mostly focusing on graphics development and graphics, like rendering engineering stuff. And yeah, I've been working with some other companies as well during this time, and now I'm back at Defold after a brief pause. So I'm super excited to be here. It's my first time in Vilnius, and yeah, it's so far so good.
Hi, great. My name is Mathias, or Matt, if you want to. I've been working with Defold since 2015, I think, when I was invited by some old colleagues to work on another gaming engine. I was working with game engines before that as well. I'm also doing more engineering stuff, like in the engine itself, not so much the editor and not so much marketing or anything else. So you know what to ask us about after the talk. I'm also a board member of the Defold Foundation, which I'll talk a little bit during this presentation. So the agenda for today, for this presentation, is we'll go through briefly what is Defold, and then follow up with a brief history, because I know some of you are quite interested in the road we've taken. We'll go through some features of the Defold engine. And we'll also talk about a special feature that we call libraries and extensions. We'll follow up with a demo, and lastly, a Q&A. So think of some good questions to ask here. So yeah, before we can kind of explain the history of Defold, it's good to know what is Defold, right? So it's a cross-platform game engine. We support the desktop platforms, Mac OS, Linux, Windows, mobile, iOS, Android, HTML5, and some consoles currently supporting Nintendo Switch. We're also adding PlayStation 4 support this year. It's a completely free engine, no hidden royalties or anything, so it's just download and try it out, and if it works out for you, you can ship your game, no problems. The trademark and the source code is owned by the Defold Foundation. I will talk about this in the history soon. The code is available online on GitHub if you want to have a look, and it has a developer-friendly license. And Defold itself is used across the world by indie developers, game studios like Melsoft here. We have a few of the Melsoft members at the front, and also students. So a brief history of Defold. It was started in 2009 by two people, Ragnar Svensson and Christian Murray, and they came from a background from AAA programming or development, and they had seen a lot of the troubles that type of development can bring, huge turnaround times and huge lead times everywhere in such a long project, and they wanted to address that with a more minimal engine with fast workflows. That's kind of the idea that Defold sprung out of, so that's where we come from. They started out as a subscription model. It was popular back then. I think both Unity had it, and I think Unreal had it back then. It didn't really pan out, but in 2014, Defold got bought by King. Everyone has probably heard of King. And they wanted to use it internally for prototyping, but they also released a few games with it, fairly popular games, Blossom Blast Saga and Petrescu Saga, and plenty of prototypes. In 2016, King also announced at GDC that Defold was supposed to be free for everyone, or Defold is free for everyone. No royalties, as I mentioned. And the benefits here is, of course, a larger audience helping out with finding bugs, and also helping out with recruitment for King. Which leads us up to 2020, 2 years ago. King decided that they wanted to make Defold open source. So they founded a foundation, the Defold Foundation. They gave it a tiny bag of seed money, so Defold Foundation can be sustainable by its own. And they transferred all the rights to the trademarks and the source code to this foundation. So Defold Foundation is now a separate legal entity. It has nothing to do with King anymore. And from there on, we've kind of taken this on as a new project, so to speak, away from King. Here you can see the personnel, the staffing, so to speak. It started out with 2 people, and at the time of King in 2016, we were at most 18 people with front and back end, marketing, whatever. And now we're back, finally back at 6 people working full time on this engine. We're mainly funded by partnerships, such as the one with Melsoft, helping out with bug fixing, feature, additions of new features, etc. We also accept donations. Well, another big partnership we have is with the new Rive app. If you have seen it, it's a cool tool. You can go to that URL, rive.app.
Yeah, let's show you a little bit of the features that we have. So it's at the core, it's both a mix of 2D and 3D engine. It's basically the same thing, but the tooling is slightly different. So for, I guess, historic reasons, since it came from, like it was developed mostly, a lot of it has been developed specifically for the King games, which mostly thus far has been 2D centric. So a lot of the workflows have been, regarding the authoring has been revolved around 2D workflows. But essentially, in the core of everything is a 3D engine that runs 2D, or that shows 2D content. But we do have, like, we will show the roadmap a little bit later, or like talk about the coming years, I guess. And we are moving a lot more towards 3D, because we feel that that's what the community wants, and that's what we want to do as well with it. So we want to take it into the next generation, kind of. And so, yeah, it's cross-platform, so we support all the desktop platforms and all the mobile platforms. And now that we can run it as our own entity, we can also venture into the console market. So we've already started, or we already ported the engine to Switch some year ago. I think that process didn't take very long, like 1 month or something, like insanely
Maybe
fast.
3 months.
Okay, well, let's say 1 month, because it sounds cooler. And so during the way, I mean, that was kind of one person job for 3 months. Kind of speak a little bit how the care and craft of the engine, because it's very, we've built it in such a way that it's easy to kind of port it to everything. It's very portable, and we will probably talk a little bit about that later. So yeah, we ported the engine to Switch. We've also worked a little bit as a publisher, so other developers in our community have released games on these platforms through us. So now the next step in this is to also port the games, or port the engine to PlayStation. We're starting off with PlayStation 4, and then we're going to continue into PlayStation 5. And hopefully Xbox and whatever platforms. So that's very exciting for our like it's been a personal kind of dream. When I was a kid, I really wanted to work on console. It took me 30 plus years to get there, but hey, when in Rome. Yeah, so with the features that we have, it's kind of like what you would expect from any engine. So sprites, texture atlases, 2D physics, 3D physics, sound, yada yada. So we try to tend to, like, talking about the principles of our tools is more of, we want to, like, not box people into our way of working. We want to kind of empower developers to do their own tools as well. So we provide not the biggest set of features in the world, but we do provide really good building blocks for people to make whatever they need. Because we kind of feel, our philosophy has always been that this is supposed to be a professional tool, and thus professionals in this space are not always super happy with whatever tools they have. Like, there is no the best engine in the world. Everybody will hate every engine, basically. So we would like to give people, well, here's building blocks for you to make whatever changes you want, basically. Yeah, the editor itself, it's very small. It's very simple. Every setup is very simple. You don't have to install anything. So, like, coming from a Windows background, installing, uninstalling is always a hassle usually. But this is basically, you download a binary and run it, and that's it. You can then publish or you can then build your game to any platform we support, and it's just super easy. We've chosen, well, we've gone to as our, like, scripting front end to the developers. So you write your games in Lua, mostly, and that's, I mean, it's a very well-known and commonly supported language, very small language, first and foremost. Like, integrating stuff into Lua is very quick, very, I wouldn't say super easy, but it's like very, 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 very popular scripting language. Writing in it's very fast, and yeah, it's dynamic and all that stuff. We have really worked a lot on the workflow regarding building your apps, and so we take care of all the boring stuff behind the scenes, and all the platform, like, we build all the behind the scenes things for you. So you basically just press a button and you have your Android APK, you have your iOS IPA or whatever. So you can just publish it or test it on any device super fast. We've started, the last thing we did before moving into the foundation was that we started looking into the editor scripting of it. And we're now continuing that work. So we have a bunch of functionality. So you can kind of hook your own Lua code into the build pipeline. So you can kind of, yeah, you get certain hooks for when the building is starting, when it's ending, and so forth. And now we're gonna invest a lot more into this to try to empower more users to do their own authoring tools within the editor. So that's going to be, like, one of the big things coming at some point. This is how it looks. So it's pretty common, pretty slim, but very sleek design. So you have your inspector panel, you have your viewports, the panels for logging and so forth, and all of this is customizable. So you can kind of set your view up with all the panels you want and etc. So one of the key things we're kind of pushing with this is we want to enable as much collaboration as possible. We kind of encourage people to use GitHub, and we've also built in this support into the engine itself or into the editor. But it's really up to you to use whatever collaboration tools you want. We'll talk about this a little bit later, I think, but we try to make sure that if you've ever worked on a big project with Git, you're going to end up with a lot of, like, merge conflicts and stuff, which is a hassle when there's deadline and there's crunch and whatever. So we try to make everything as lean as possible, as fast as possible, and deterministic as possible. Because having worked on such projects myself, spent weeks on trying to merge one branch into another and ending up redoing 2 weeks worth of work. That's not fun for anyone. So we're trying to really push that quite hard. And also, since we are an open engine, we have very good ties to the community. We have a very active community. We try to get people to help us out as much as possible, and because they will essentially help themselves out in the long run. If I do whatever, an extension that does something cool, and someone else, well, let's do this 10% cooler. Well, that's going to make my stuff cooler as well. So it's all over like the synergy between these things. So it's very important to us. Yeah, and also, like I said, we have a really, like our people keep coming back to us and saying like, oh, your community is so good. Everyone's so friendly. And I guess people are like, they're not especially, like they're normal friendly, but I guess that speaks a little bit on how it is in other communities. Like people are maybe not that friendly in other communities. I don't know. But if you're interested, like join our Discord and join the forum and check it out. It's like people are super helpful, and it's really one of like the part of like the unique selling point, if you will, for us, because we really, speaking myself, I really want to help people. If I make something and someone says like, oh, this is awesome, thank you for doing this, then that makes me want to do more stuff. And so it really comes down to this like effect of everybody helping each other, and it really makes the product better. It makes our work easier, and so I really think that's one of the strong suits of the work we're doing. So it's super important for us to kind of empower all the people in the community. We are a very small team. We are only 6 people now. We hope to grow during the year, but we're still only 6 people. We're all developers. We don't really have an infinite amount of time. So it's very important for like the product itself, for everybody to kind of help out. Yeah, there's also like being a professional game development tool. It's very common that people use stuff like continuous integration for their pipelines. Especially for very large projects, they will need to have builds to send to QA, they will need builds to send to publishers, and they need to verify that their stuff works. So we've tried to, or we have all this exposed so you can kind of automate your entire process quite fast and quite easy. And it's the same tools that we use internally in the editor and everything, so everything's exposed. So you can, basically you don't even have to use the editor ever if you don't want to. You can just use the command line tools and all the things we provide from there. So let's say you want to build a automatic switch version of the game. Well, you can do that if you want to within like one line. So it's very fast, it's very easy to work with and everything. And yeah, and we use all of the data formats are in text, clear text, so you can kind of see all the changes you make. We don't like hide anything from you. It's very easy to like script everything because it's text. You can parse everything. You can hook your whatever you want to do with the assets quite easily. And also we use very deterministic build tools, as we said before. So you rarely end up in situations where you get a huge amount of corruptions. It's it works quite well, everything. Yeah, the source is open and available, and yeah, so go check it out, I guess. Principles, är jag fortfarande? Jag kan fortsätta. Yeah, so one of the things that kind of spawned this project was from people working in AAA, and if anyone here has worked in AAA, you kind of understand a little bit what that means in terms of startup times, in terms of just general iteration times, just getting from proof of concept to getting something into the engine, kind of reloading everything. It takes a lot of time, and that costs a lot of money usually. Like if you if you have to wait for 5 minutes to a project to open, that's 5 minutes you could do something productive with. And so we really kind of strive from the beginning to minimize this, because of having worked on those projects ourselves, we know that it's a pain. So this is kind of helps everything from the start of the project to the finish, to the end of the project, and really helps a lot to kind of mitigate a lot of the worry you have when like nearing completion of a project. When you get into the more crunchy part, that is something that can really like put a block to things. Like startup times can escalate basically, which is what we mean with avoid optimization at the end of the project. Like we want to have the same experience from start to finish. Obviously that's not always the case, but that's what we strive for, at least from start to finish. Yeah, so for example, one of the key selling points that Christian and those guys had at the beginning when they sold this King was that we have something we call hot reload, which is basically a very good feature to have for anyone in the project. So you can have your game running on a Switch device. You change your assets in the editor, you reload everything, and you see it instantly on your device. So you don't have to like rebuild anything, upload through various tools. It just over the net just works, and that's really helpful for various reasons. Yeah, so we put a lot of effort into our startup times, our asset build pipeline, and to just make sure that we don't spend any time like waiting for stuff, because that's super annoying. Yeah, so like we said before, we have a really fast process to export everything, and the way it's set up is that you don't have to install any SDKs, you don't have to configure any third-party yada yada. We make everything available within the ecosphere of the editor. So every commit we make, every code change we make, we build everything on our GitHub servers or the CIs, and you basically get the entire environment just by that. So you don't have to reinstall anything, you don't have to reconfigure anything, you just get everything within the editor. And that's something that works really well to kind of mitigate the slow turnaround times. So yeah. Yeah, and also one big thing that we've been working quite a lot on as well is we are very thorough with our backwards compatibility. So you should be able to basically open up a 5-year-old project in a new version of the editor, and it should still work. Like you shouldn't have to spend weeks or months trying to port an old version to a new one if we don't have to. There are some cases where we have to kind of break APIs, but we do our best to avoid that. So let's say you made a game 5 years ago, you want to port it to a Switch platform or to a PS4, you shouldn't really have to do a lot of changes. And that's kind of part of our core philosophy of the engine. Like we should be able to take care of that, and you shouldn't have to deal with it, basically. Because we know that during development, we have to make certain changes. We will probably add platforms, remove some stuff, but that should be our worry and not your. And yeah, another thing that we are, I guess, proud of maybe, is our small engine size. So we don't, the baseline is we don't really ship a huge amount of features, but we ship a lot of possibilities to people to make their own, and we work really hard on trying to get a very small binary size for the engine. So yeah, for HTML5 version of the engine is not even 900 kilobytes, which all of this kind of ties together into performance as well. Like the less code we have, the faster it's going to go, and the less data we ship, the more, like the less people will be more inclined to download a game that's small rather than a game that's big. I think that's both like a psychological statement as well as like a technical statement. So in some areas of the world, you don't really have the best internet connection, so you probably don't want to download something that's 500 megabytes. You want to download something that's like 5 megabytes. So that's really gonna help drive your revenue as a studio, and it's gonna give us more margin to build features that might take more performance. So yeah, we've been trying to really like push this narrative really hard. Yeah, and then let's go into libraries. So I guess this is kind of common for most game engines, but we have the possibility to kind of, like speaking in terms of collaboration, we want people to share their work and to not kind of reinvent the wheel more than once. So we have the possibility to, in a very easy manner, to kind of repack or package your work in an asset that can be shared to anyone. And this is basically like an asset is a texture or a font or sound or script, whatever you want. You can kind of freely package your work into a bundle that then you can pass around to people with just a link. And then the engine will take care of it. Oh, yes?
So yeah, would libraries be usable for like, I don't know, adding as mods to an existing game? Would that be a possibility?
From which side? Do you mean more like mods from like a community, like players would add?
Complete game those be added as modifications to existing game, like, you know, like not, yeah, just mods.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah.
I mean, at the core, we do link the engine statically. So once that's built, it's built. But then you have the possibility to load more Lua files on the side, or download and put into the Lua engine. And you know, I think all the platforms nowadays support shared libraries as well, so you should be able to load those as well if they're signed on that device. So I think that there's probably possibilities to do user modding as well. Of course, you as a developer need to figure out an API that the modders can use. Which is basically the same strategy we use towards you, the developers. You know, if that's an answer to your question.
Yeah. Right. So the way we package these are basically just like all of these libraries, and then later we will talk about something called native extensions. The structure is basically like the same thing as your main project. It's a small project that you just insert as a zip file as a dependency to your project, and then they become available when you, in your game code, so to speak. So this should be very simple. This process is just basically you grab this link to zip, add it as a dependency, and then it will be resolved inside the editor. And here's some. So an example would be like having worked on other game engines, like building a GUI system or having a GUI system is kind of difficult. I haven't seen one that's like perfect yet, or even great. They all have different structures, and people kind of demand different things from them, and it's always very complicated to build one that kind of works and solves everything always. So here's some examples of people that have built these as extensions, or like as libraries, so to speak. So all of these are packaged in a zip file. You just add the path to your project, and then you can build. GUI is pretty simple. Yeah, and here is we have an asset portal as well. All of this is free, and anyone can upload anything. We have a bunch of our like official extensions that or assets that we have shipped as a part, things that we have been using during the years at King and later after, and these are all published for free. There's no, don't have to pay anything, which is the word free. And then rest of our things that people have just uploaded, like people from the community and our users that wanted to share something. And it's quite a large variety of different things like AI or fonts or music or whatever. Yeah, and then extensions, Mathias.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so after a while we realized that, I mean, our library system is super helpful, and we struggled with ideas of how to extend the engine itself, because we had these requests like, oh, we want the engine to be able to do this or that, like adding support for the newest app store of whatever platform. And then we came up with the idea that we can do the same thing, like with a regular asset, you put source code in your asset, but how does that work? So this is about these things we call extensions, because we extend the functionality of the engine. We mean C++ code, Java, Objective-C. I think we also have support for JavaScript as well. And we also have a C++ API that lets you hook into various lifecycle functions of the editor, or the engine, sorry. And it also allows you to create new Lua modules. So you can create, I don't know, a new pathfinding library where you have the API in Lua and your implementation in C++, for instance. And the way we actually, this works is that we grab all the source from your project. So all these dependencies or library extensions that you saw that you can easily add functionality one after another, we grab all that source and send it up to a cloud server and build it for you. Jhonny mentioned earlier that we have a simple download for the editor. The editor is quite small, while our build server is quite large instead. So the build server has all the SDKs for all the platforms. So that one is pretty large. But it empowers you because you can do so much more on your own. You don't have to care about these SDKs. And quite often, our users use these extensions without knowing that they're getting a custom built engine for their specific purposes, which is super powerful. Right, I'm gonna do the scary thing and try to do a demo. Does this work? Could we get this mic for this? No. We'll make do. Let's check. That one is running. We can do this. So I'm gonna demonstrate a simple example that we have of creating one such extension. And let's first browse, where is the cursor? We mentioned a little bit earlier that we have a lot of learning materials, tutorials, samples, etc. And we have these as templates. You can choose when you start the editor. You can choose some templates. We have a native extension template here. I've created a pre-created one for this occasion, but we have tutorials here and samples here. But I'm gonna start this one. Maybe that's better. I mean, I think it works. So basically, what you do is you put certain types of assets into your extension, which by itself then defines it as an extension. So we have a manifest here that tells the editor that this is an extension. And the simplest case here is that you have a source file. we'll check the source file in a second here. First, we'll check the usage of the source file. This extension adds a Lua module called my extension with one function, reverse. And it takes a string and it reverses a string. And it also displays this string. So if I build here, it shows this string. So the original string, I'm not sure if you saw it here, but come on, do it there. The original string is at the top there, starting with A, and as you can see, it's reversed here. And the way this works is that we have this C++ file. We can start at the bottom, actually, where we define an extension, some C++ symbols. You don't need to know the details, really. But we also have a bunch of lifecycle functions that gives you hooks into various times at the lifespan of the engine. So you have an app initialize, you have an app finalize, where you can do whatever you need to do when you initialize. You also have an update. And in this initialize, we actually register a Lua module with a function with the name reverse. And the reverse function is this. So it's a fairly simple loop there. And as an example, I'm just going to comment out doing the Swedish chef here. And build again. And in this example, I would just want to overwrite the first characters of the string with hello world. Should have said hello Vilnius, of course. Missed opportunity. So this is just the very most basic example of how you can add your C++ code to do something that you might have found some cool code on the internet and you want to use it. Fairly easy. And you're not limited to just C++ files. You can add external libraries as well, or header files. So it gets fairly complicated or more advanced the further you go, but it's very powerful. See if I can get back here. No, that's not it. Yes, thank you. Every time I do this. As I mentioned, this is extremely powerful because it unblocks us developers. We're a small team, and it unblocks the users, you guys, that want more features. Popular features are, of course, ads. So we have plenty of ad networks, more than 2, probably 5, 6. We have various other platform support, Steam, Pocky, Facebook Instant Games, social analytics backends like Nakama, PlayFab. So it's super powerful, and it's very much used across most projects, I would say. A second demo. We talked a little bit earlier about 3D support. Our toolset is still very much not tailored for 3D support, but our community kind of works around that in brilliant ways. So they created their own Blender exporter, and they can sync to the assets in the Defold project. And this is an asset or extension, both actually, which provides you with a lot of 3D content that you can use. I'm just going to start it here, building the content. So they use it as a core asset for their own projects. I'm also going to show their other projects in a bit here. So we haven't really seen much of 3D content before in our engine. So this is fairly good for us. I mean, leaves a lot to ask for, of course, but we'll get there. And the more users that ask for support, the better, of course. So this is fairly simple demo. But this is a community-driven thing, and they are using it to ship their own game. And they also have another example of using this same package. I'm going to try to play a video here. Fortunately, no sound, but it doesn't really matter. So this is captured on an iPhone using this asset package. So I do think that we have 3D on our horizon this year to a usable state for regular users. So these users are kind of more advanced users, I would say. Come on, move there. We also have some upcoming improvements. We mentioned before, we're porting to PlayStation 4 right now. We'll probably start porting to PS5 this year as well. We're improving the 3D support, both in the editor and in the engine. We want to add multi-texture support because sadly we don't have it yet. Adding support for 3D meshes is kind of crucial for these types of projects, so we need to add that. We still don't have it. Jhonny also mentioned editor extensions, the type of editor scripts, and I think extensions in general is something that we've seen has worked on so many different levels in our pipeline. So nowadays we have both extensions for the various APIs in the engine. We also have extensions for our command line build tool. We also have a beginning of extensions in the editor, and we'll just continue working on this. And our internal joke is that eventually all that is left in the editor and the engine is just a for loop, and the rest is just extensions. I mean, it will never be that way, but it's kind of indicative of the sentiment. And finally, we'll just show a few slides of what types of game can you actually create with Defold. So these are released games, not just prototypes as the 3D stuff you saw. Tricky Dungeon is a platformer by Ben James, released on Steam and Nintendo Switch. It's a really tough platformer. You die a lot. So if you're into those types of games, it's gonna punish you. It's great. Interrogation by Critique Gaming, also released on Steam and Nintendo Switch. It's a kind of a detective story, lots of large textures. The videos are flipbook animations, so it's probably one of our largest games in terms of texture content. So it's good to know that we can handle that as well. I encourage you to try it out. Here's an upcoming game, Plague Lords by Red Unit Studios. They have a demo out, I think, on Steam right now, and it's supposed to be launched this spring. I don't have a date for you, but there's a demo. So also looking very cool. It's a real-time strategy game. And finally, kind of our pride and joy right now, Family Island by Melsoft Games. It's, I mean, it's really popular. It has something like 1 million users each day, and I think 4 million users each month, if I'm not mistaken. So it's a huge success. So in these screenshots, you see a zoomed-in version, but it's actually a large island, so you can zoom out and see all the areas you've unlocked. So it's using spine animations, sprites, particles, all the regular 2D stuff that you would imagine. It also uses extensions a lot in order to talk to various backend services. So another great example of what you can do. Sometimes people ask us, can you do a commercial game with Defold? And the answer is yes, it's totally possible.
They're also hiring.
They are.
FYI.
Shameless plug. If you want to talk to Melsoft, we have a few employees over here. I think that's it, right, Jhonny? Yeah. Thank you so much for listening to us. We're happy to take more questions.
Thanks a lot. Oh, okay, it's working. So we'll try to use microphone if we have some questions, because we have a broadcast. Okay, how to politely do this?
Hello. Is this working? Yeah. It's not a question, but more like an observation. You talked about editor scripting and extensibility. I happen to have some experience with Unity, and the extensibility of Unity's editor almost happened by accident. And I think that's probably one of the top 3 features that enabled Unity to grow to whatever Unity is right now. And it was almost accidental, but so yeah, if you want, I think that's like a really important thing to maybe not make that by accident, but make that consciously. And another observation is that when you talked about that everything would be an extension and eventually the engine itself would be just nothing, that's also something that Unity tried for the past 5 years or something or so, where the idea was that eventually you would get just a blank window and everything would come through. In Unity, it's called packages. Turns out that's much, much harder than anyone expected, because you need to, the famous story of that APIs are forever, and whenever mistakes you make in an API, it's forever. So that's something that's potentially risky, just a warning. That's it.
Thank you, Aras. Excellent points, because, I did mention just the bare bone for loop with tongue-in-cheek. We're never really striving for that. We want a good base package for the common user. It's more like the philosophy that keep it in mind when you develop new features, that we might want to replace this thing with something else, whatever it may be. And it turns out inside our engine, we've been fairly lucky to have a lot of these APIs built in such a way, so it just felt naturally to try it out. And you mentioned doing stuff by accident. The extensions, the feature of extensions was a conscious decision, but it was almost kind of an accident that it became so popular. And once it grew popular, we just had to start supporting it more and more. And now we have a huge, or not that huge, but we have a large API that we need to maintain. So I do recognize both of these things, and we'll just continuously think about them, because we're the ones sitting there. We don't want to break APIs for anyone else, and suddenly they can't work. It has happened, but we really try not to change those things. Yeah, it's good points.
Okay, thanks a lot. Do we have something more?
Thank you guys for your talk. And what is the mission of the Defold Foundation? What drives you most? Any big dream, maybe? As a team or personally? Up to you.
Good question. I think from the foundation perspective, it's their prerogative is to make sure that the code is up to date and maintained. Because if you just put some code on GitHub and don't maintain it, it will not be used by anyone. So that was one of our concerns, and we had discussions with King to enable us to ask them to give us money so we can do this. So the foundation has some seed money so they can pay for these upgrades of iOS SDKs, etc. But then we also, like you mentioned, we have the personal thing. Like, we worked with the engine at King. We grew close together as a team, and we just knew that we wanted to work together again with the same product, because we just liked this product so much.
Yeah, also, big thing will be we really want to expand the community. So not only empower the community, but we want to see it grow. So much so that our role to kind of won't be as like critical, because it does take some amount of time for us to maintain all this. So, and we really want people to kind of help out and to help fix their own problems, basically. So that's one of the things that the foundation really wants to work with and does work with, to kind of like push this collaboration and like try to get more people to join us and help with the quality assurance and whatever. Just grow the community, basically.
Thanks. There was somebody.
Hello, thank you for your talk. Sorry if I missed, but why did in 2018 there was a drop of the employees?
Oh, yeah, so that was basically, Defold was owned by King at that time, but then King decided to make the source code public and also found the Defold Foundation. Previously, the engine was used for a few games and also a lot of prototypes, but internally at King they already had a successful game engine, which is Fiction Factory, which they use for the Candy Crush. And eventually they figured they wanted to push more on their initial game engine. So after talks with us, we agreed upon, moving everything out into the foundation and doing that. But the seed money for that foundation was very small, so we could only afford 2 people. So that's why it went from 18 people down to 2 people. And then we had to work a lot to grow the partnerships again. So now we're back at 6 people and growing. So.
Yeah, and we are 6 people that have worked together on this exact same project when we were at King. And we expect to grow even more this year. So hopefully up to 10, I don't know. We don't have a number, but we're growing. Also hiring, I guess.
Yeah.
Also, you mentioned one of USP's small application size. So would it be more focused on web-based games? Like making...
I mean, we certainly have a lot of users that ship on, for instance, Poki.com. But web-based games, various portals where the download size is still very important. And it turns out after adding the support for the HTML5, I don't know when we added it, but at least it showed that we could get the sizes down to those numbers. I think this is a vanilla project. With the extension system, you can actually strip the engine even more, like throughout the physics engine, etc. So you can probably shrink it more. But yeah, I forgot what the question was.
Me too.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Web-based games. Well, the next question would be about NFT games. Did you had any?
We haven't done anything like that personally, or I don't know of any explicit games. But one benefit from moving from King to the foundation is the foundation can set its own, what do you call it, rules and guidelines. So previously they had some other guidelines, but now you can do whatever you want to do and is allowed to do in your country, for instance. So there's nothing stopping you from creating a NFT game.
I think we had, like, when the engine was at King, it was still open and free, well, not open source, but it was free for people to use. But they prohibited like casino games, right? You weren't supposed to, or you weren't allowed to make money off of casino games. But now that we are not tied to King, I mean, there's nothing stopping really. Yeah. Like we can't really set those limits.
Okay, thanks. Was there somebody from upstairs? Do we have something more? Oh.
Okay.
So one thing with, like for instance, for Unity, and when you transition to a new update version, sometimes things break. Not that much nowadays, but there's still, especially with like extensions or something else, something can go wrong. And looking at the screen and of Defold, I noticed like at the very bottom right, you had like a new update available. So yeah, that actually makes me wonder just, did you like put some focus like on compatibility, so updates just break less, or yeah, just curious about general compatibility through updates?
Yeah, I mean, from the start, basically, we knew that this was one of the problems that we've had on AAA games. Basically, like you had different people working on different platforms, etc., and you need to integrate something new. Working with tools, I internally at the company, we shipped various editors to our level designers, and if someone had broken some file formats in between, it could get very messy. They were perhaps in the middle of a merge or whatever. So we were very aware of that problematic scenario from the start, and we had that as a strict thing to think about backwards compatibility. And also, I mean, even 18 people, not everyone was a developer fixing stuff in the engine or the file format. So we were at most maybe 10. And at 10 people, you can keep track of those types of things, and you can have proper design discussions to avoid these things and keep these things in mind. So for us, with a small team, we don't think it was that particularly hard to do, actually.
And also we have our release cycle is usually a month, I think, with a 2-week beta period where we kind of present the beta version of what we intend to ship to the community, and then a lot of people help us out to test their products or projects in our editor, because we don't really have that. We do have an extensive suite of tests, but we can't really test actual projects that as much. So a lot of people that want, like a lot of our feature requests comes from people in the community, and they are very eager usually to help us out in testing the product. So we catch issues and errors quite quickly. And as we said before, we take a lot of care and craft regards to kind of not breaking stuff for people. So backwards compatibility is a big thing for us. Yes.
And okay, does it more or less apply to I don't know, community-made extensions? Because sometimes you have like some extension that's crucial to the project, but it gets deprecated. So some feature it's dependent on gets deprecated. So you're stuck with a dilemma of either looking for alternative extension or trying to cobble something yourself, which is hard with the know-how, or just being stuck with an old version which comes with its own caveats. So yeah, is there some reverse compatibility with like features that would get used by extensions? I mean,
in that sense, I think we've been also pretty lucky as well. I mean, we're coming back to the point made earlier, like some of the features grew faster, like our extension system grew faster than a lot of the other things. But we've kept kind of a close look at it, and fortunately we haven't needed to break stuff like that. Like I think we accidentally did it once, and then it was our extension, we could update it. But I think we'll communicate this with everyone so they have time to update, etc. And
also we do tests for the biggest extensions that. We do include tests for those in our pipelines as well. So we know that people will use the add extensions or Facebook extensions. We have included those in our unit tests as well. So we do make sure.
Actually, yeah. Asking about extensions, you kind of showcased the 3D one, but since you mentioned you closely interact with biggest ones, maybe you could, like, I don't know, just briefly tell about the most interesting, like, communities extension developments.
I think there are so many. I think fairly interesting ones are the ad networks. That it's such a lively concept because various games continuously look for ways to monetize their game because they need it, and they can do it with these fairly simple tools, really. So other notable extensions, I'm not. Yeah, Fmod extension, perhaps. So if you are a licensed Fmod developer, you can put those libraries in a pre-made Fmod extension, and suddenly you can start using Fmod, the sound banks in there, and that works on Nintendo Switch as well. What else do we have? Recently we updated, we moved our internal version. We had a homemade version basically of the Spine runtime, but eventually we couldn't keep up with the community's demands of updated features, so we need to move it into an extension. That's also a fairly notable work and achievement, I think, which sets the bar for more interesting community extensions.
Okay, thanks a lot. I guess, yeah, you can continue chatting after our all sessions. So yeah, applause.
Thank you.